Hi everyone, welcome back to GameMaker Cast. It's Mickey, and in this episode we're going to be working on getting some buttons into our UI, so when our game ends and our player is all the way over to the left, we can have a retry and a quit button. The very first thing I want to do is create a new group of sprites, and I'll just call this one buttons. I'm going to create a new sprite, and I will name this SPR button retry, and I'll make one more sprite, and this one will be called SPR button quit. Alright, so let's work on the retry one first. What I want to do is just say edit image, and then we'll go images and import strip image, and let's go and open up our retry button. And we have 3 different frames per row, and it's 128 by 64 pixels, and we'll use the same settings as everything else, so 8, 8, and 8. Then we'll say convert. We'll let GameMaker automatically apply the height and width and everything, so we have our 3 different states. Let's do the exact same thing on the quit button here. We'll do edit image, image, import strip, and we'll say quit. Once again, we have 3, 128 by 64, and then we have 8, 8, and 8. We'll say convert, and yes. So now we have our quit button and we have our retry button. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new object group. We'll just call this one buttons. And in here we're going to create a new object, and we'll just call this obj button. And this object right here is actually going to represent the parent. So we're going to have a parent that has 2 child buttons. But before we do this, we need to set up a state machine for our button sprites. We can do this by just opening up the scripts and creating a new script. We'll call this one SCR, and let's just call this button state. Now we're not going to include this anywhere, and just because we have this in a script, these enums are going to be accessible to us. So we'll say enum button state, and the button state is going to have idle, hover, and finally we'll have pressed. So these are going to be the 3 states that our button can be in. Make sure we save that and we can close it. And back in our object button, we're going to have a couple different events. We'll have a create event. We also need a step event. We need a mouse left pressed, another mouse left release. We need a mouse enter, and then a mouse leave. Alright, so we'll start with the create event for this object here. The create event, we want to assign the sprite, assign the state. So we'll say state equals button state.idle, if I could spell that, idle. Next thing we want to do is make sure that we are not animating. So we'll just say make sure we are not animating, so we set our image speed equals 0. We also want to set our image alpha to 0, so we'll say sprite is invisible, image alpha equals 0. And last but not least, we have to make sure that our buttons are deactive, so when the game starts, the user can't click around and find one of our buttons. So we'll just say deactivate self. And to do that, we'll say instance deactivate object, and we'll just pass in the ID, so that's the current object that we're on. So let's go into the step event, and this is going to be the sprite drawing. So in here, we need to make sure we switch what state that we're in. So this is just basically an if statement. If we say case button state.idle, well, what do we want to happen in the idle state? We want our image index to be 0, and that's it. The next case, which is button state.hover, well, in here we want our image index to be 1. Then we will just break out. And let's finish this off with case button state.pressed, and our image index will be 2. And then we'll just end it there. So what's going to happen is whenever we are in our idle state, we're going to be in this frame. When we hover over, we'll be in the lighter frame, and then when we click the button, we'll be in this dark frame here. Let's go back to our parent. The thing here at the bottom, what we want to do is handle the alpha. So we basically want to say if we cannot be seen, then we want to slowly make ourselves seen. So we'll say if image alpha is less than 1, then what we want to do is say image alpha equals lerp our current image alpha, and we want to lerp to 1, and we'll do it slowly over time of 0.5. Otherwise, our image alpha is equal to 1 or higher, then we just want to set the image alpha to 1. And the one thing that we haven't done is I want to give the ability for these buttons to move up or move into the side. So to do that, I'll go into variable definitions. I'm going to create two variables here. The first variable I'll call x position end. The default will be 0, and I'll keep it as a real. And we'll use a y position of end as well, and that will be a real. Now the reason that we're doing it here, we could do it in the create event, but if we're doing it here in GameMaker 2, we're easily able to edit these without going into the creation code. And I'll show you that in 1 second. If we go back to the step event, here at the bottom is where we're going to handle the moving of the buttons. So we could say if the current x position is not equal to the position end, then what we want to do is say x equals lerp our current position, and we want to lerp to the position end and 0.2. So it's just a little bit slower. We can copy this and paste it in, and we can do the same thing for the y position. Let's make sure we change all the x's to y. And in the end, these variables should show up. Just takes GameMaker a little while to recognize them. Alright, now when we press our left button, what we're going to be doing is having some different states. So when we press the left, we'll say state equals button state dot pressed. And when we release, we'll just say state equals button state dot idle. We'll copy this because we'll take this idle one and we'll also put it in the mouse leave. And when we go to mouse over, we'll say state equals button state dot hover. Okay, I think we're almost done here. What we're going to have to do is create two buttons for the buttons that we imported. So we just close everything I have here, and then we'll create a new object under our button called obj underscore button retry. I'll make sure that I set the sprite to the retry sprite, and I also want to set up the parent. So buttons obj button. So now we've inherited all of these events. We also have the variables in here, and we'll get to that in a second. Just making sure everything works. Now what we want to do for the retry is we can overwrite the left press. So in here we could right click and say inherit event. So what that means is it's going to automatically fire the pressed state here. So the state's going to change, and then it will run the code in here. So what we want to do in here is set our score to 0, and then we'll just say room underscore restart. So we're just going to restart the room, make sure that our score is 0, and everything should work. And we'll create a new button, again, obj button quit. We will set the sprite to quit, and then set the parent to our object button. And then once again, we'll just inherit the left press. And in here, what we want is game underscore end, and that will actually quit the program. Okay, so let's close everything, and let's open up our room. And on the UI layer, I'm going to drag out my retry button, and I'll also drag out the quit button. We'll try to line this up so it's kind of in the middle of the room and it looks good. I think that's pretty good. Alright, so we have the X position of 184 and the Y position of 112. So for the retry over here, I can just double click. I can click variables, and the position and X, I want it 184, and the end, I want it 112. 112. Now I can close that. I can click on quit, and then double click on this button, and go to variables. The X position is 328, and the Y position is 112. Now all that's left is to take our two buttons and just kind of drag them down a little bit. I'll drag them down to right there. Now the only thing that is left is to make it so when our player goes off the screen, these two buttons appear. So to do that, what we're going to have to do is open up our player themselves. And we'll make sure that we are in our step event, and we'll scroll all the way down to the bottom. Right here where we're checking our X position, before we destroy the player, let's activate those objects. So to do that, we'll say activate, and we want instance activate object, and the object that we want to activate is going to be our button retry. So we'll say object button retry, make sure it's spelled correctly, and we can do the same with the quit button. Now the reason why this is going to work is because there's only two buttons in our scene. There's one for retry and one for quit, so it's not going to fire a bunch of different events. Let's fire this up, and let's see if we can make this happen. Okay, so we'll just come along here. Our score is still working. Our player can jump. We're a little bit slow here, but let's make sure we don't jump over the first one. And once we die, our buttons come up, retry and quit. So let's click on retry. Our score is reset. Our player can still jump. He still moves, so all is good there. We'll just do one more thing. We will crash, and when we go off the screen, our buttons should come back up. Looks nice. And now let's hit quit, and our game quits properly. Alright, I think that's pretty good for this episode. I'd like to thank you for watching and hope you subscribe.